What's going on, everybody? It's Willoughbys, and welcome back to the Lore Chronicles. So we are 1 week into the Archazia's Island metagame, and between two big events, specifically SSG and the Encounter, which we mentioned at this video, one deck reigned supreme, or rather, one ink color reigned supreme, and that was Sapphire, but more specifically, Sapphire Steel items, which was almost expected. We knew Sapphire was going to dominate with cards like Tamatoa and Scrooge McDuck being introduced with Archazia's Island, but seeing Sapphire Coil come out, many players thought that Ruby Sapphire would be the deck to beat, and we see now that it is Sapphire Steel. Upon seeing just how powerful cards like Tamatoa, Scrooge McDuck, and even Belle have been in combinations with Sapphire cards we already had, like Hiram, Pawpsicle, and even the Steel Fortisphere, it's got a lot of players up in arms, thinking there might just be another errata or ban coming soon to some of these cards that we've mentioned. Is it too soon to panic and we just have to let the metagame flesh itself out a little bit, or is there actual cause for concern and we can expect to see some of these cards get in the boot pretty soon? Well, that's what we tried to break down in our discussion this week. Dick Burns was an absolute all-star this week and really explained a lot of the ins and outs of erratas and bans, and really broke down for us what he thinks should or shouldn't take place, and if anything takes place, why it might happen. So if you are somebody who wants to see a card get banned or just aren't convinced that it really needs to go that far, you're definitely going to like this video. Thanks for watching and enjoy the discussion. I recently put out a tweet. I'm going to read it now to everybody. So I put up a poll on my X. You can follow me at Willoughbys. I'm a shameless shill. All right, so it says, this is an opinion, right? Will there be an errata this set? And I put bonus points if you reply and tell us why, right? So this got 1,900 views, right? So a good amount of people saw this, and it also got 188 votes. So I get it. Are we representing the whole entire Lorcana community's opinion here? No. But yes, in terms of like, yes, absolutely. All 188 of us.
Yeah.
but you know, this I think is a pretty good just like sample size, and we can just extrapolate a little bit and say this is generally, if we were to get the whole community, it would look something like this, right? So 10% of this, keep in mind, is just people who just wanted to see the results. They just clicked their little result button so they could see what everybody else thought. But for those of us that had a backbone and voted, okay, we had 51% of the vote, 51.6% said no, there will not be any erratas, and 37.8% said yes. So that actually surprised me, because
that's a lot.
It's pretty close, all things considered. You know what I mean? Like, that's like 50 and basically 40 is really how I'm looking at that. So there's not a lot of difference there, and I would say the community is pretty divided on whether or not there's going to be an errata, right? So I did have some replies here that we'll talk about in a little bit, but just as a jumping off point, I wanted to ask you, Dick, what do you think about the concept of an errata for this set, or just for Lorcana in general right now?
Well, you know, for anyone who is just jumping in, because we have had an errata already, and it was Bucky. But an errata is when they just straight up tell you the card that you have in your possession does not do what it says it does. Funny enough, I did not plan this. I have a Bucky right here. Look at this prehistoric being.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's got ward and everything?
It doesn't even do this stuff anymore. So, yeah. An errata, very rare in card games, much more common in digital card games, right? I mean, Marvel Snap, there's an errata like every week. Am I right? Like,
yeah,
I haven't played
absolutely.
it in a while,
but no, you're right. They're constantly changing cards.
Yeah. So, like, just, you know, this could always be someone's new card game and first card game and first video. If so, how did you start here? There's way better channels to start with. But anyway, yeah. So I personally hate erratas.
Oh, okay. So why is that?
Yeah. Well, I think that it is extremely confusing, especially like if you go to locals and people, like a lot of people that I go to locals with don't watch any content. It's not like Ravensburger's website is like this big hub of information, so they would just be confused if I walked in and I said, "Oh, hey, this deck this card right here that you built your entire deck around, this card does not do what it says. You know, they'll just look at it and they'll look at me and they'll say, "What are you talking about? It does everything it says because this is language and that's how language works, right?"
Right.
So having to explain to someone, no, actually this card costs 3 and it does not have ward and it now says that you have to shift to use it would just like blow a lot of people's minds,
Right.
right? Yeah. So the other option is to just straight up ban a card, which has the same, you know, if someone built their entire deck around Bucky, at least they could, you know, for that night just be like, okay, well, I have to play as though it's the errata version. If they just straight up banned a card, then it's like, no, you actually can't play tonight, or like take those cards out of your deck, add 4 others. Whereas the deck functionally would do nothing without that card, right? That's why the card's banned.
Right.
Yeah. So, what do you think? What would you prefer?
Well, I think that's interesting what you've said here about how, like, yeah, you know, like for people like us and probably for the people who watch our content, we're kind of like involved deeply in the game. You know, we keep up, we follow people on Twitter or whatever, you know, make content or watch content about the game. But there probably are a lot of people in just like different situations or even just like different like areas that, you know, don't care to be super like in the game. There's also, by the nature of this, we talk about you know, by the nature of this being a Disney card game specifically, we also have like a lot of people who've never played trading card games before that like just bypass. I see TikTokers all the time, you know, on my TikTok feed. They're just like, open a pack of Lorcana with me, and they like literally don't play the game, but they just like opening it because it's Disney. So like, you know, there are like different levels of like who's gonna be engaged and involved, and if those people do want to play at like a locals but don't want to like stay involved and up to date in the latest Lorcana and Ravensburger news, they're gonna miss erratas. And it is kind of like, I guess the reason why I point out what you said is to say that when Ravensburger or any, you know, trading card game company creates like or decides to ban or errata a card, it's a big deal, right? This is like a significant game defining and changing decision, and it impacts your players in more ways than one. So I think with that in mind, right, the fact that this is such a big decision, I would like to believe that there should not be any erratas this set or really like in the future. Obviously, like to say like there will never be them is kind of silly, but in theory, right, my hope as a player and as a consumer of this product is that it is, which, you know, this is a pipe dream, but like ultimately my goal is like I want to play this game because I want it to be perfect in the sense that they will never have to go back and change my cards. I will always be able to just play the game exactly as it was printed. And I think that's kind of like my jumping off point of like what I want and what I think should be correct. I think banning gets a little complicated just because I know sometimes people can, what I've heard at least is like people can ban cards or companies can ban cards less like forever and more of like to keep like certain things on rotation, you know, maybe only from certain sets I've heard of before. But yeah, so I think in general, I'm like against banning and erratas less because I like am literally against them. Like I do think we should keep the game balanced and we should be able to like, you know, they should have the agency to make those decisions, but more so because I think it's just a bad like look. At least for me, I remember when Bucky got errata, this being my first trading card game, I say it every video. If you don't get it at this point, you know, this is what we're doing here. But like I was kind of confused, and I think sometimes it can kind of have like shaky footing. What set is he from? I forget. What
Rise of Bloodborne.
Which is set 2. Oh my god. Okay, so but he didn't get errata until set 4. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, just wanted to check.
And it was halfway through a DLC season.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Europe never even played with it errated where it was relevant. Whereas in NA we had Toronto, which was a one of a kind format that we would have never ever seen, which was a set whatever, but we had the weird Bucky, which was essentially banned. It was errated out of existence, which I should mention. I know at least one person who quit playing Disney Lorcana because they had invested all of their money into this deck, which like it's a trading card. Like I think that's crazy. It's a trading card game. Like the Beasts and the Tinkerbells and the Diablos, everything that was super expensive did not immediately drop in value.
Right.
Like you could always have traded off into a different archetype, but it can be incredibly frustrating. I actually quit playing modern Magic the Gathering when they banned Mox Opal.
Oh wow.
I'd never played it again, haven't played it since, because that actually like it went from like $100 to like nothing the next day. And it was my favorite deck that I had played since it was in standard. And it was not even banned for the deck that I was playing it in, which is something that I feel like we should at least touch on in this, but
Sure.
probably a little longer
Later on
into the video.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think that's the thing is like we weren't even a full year into the game, right, when that happened. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know. I think we were a year into it, but not into competitive play.
Okay, we weren't even a year into competitive play. My point being, right, 4 sets in is new. that's like pretty new for a TCG. And so for me, I remember when they errated it, like I got worried for like the game. Or like another game is Altered. Altered was like something that had come out. I was interested, started playing it. They printed a really busted card. And before the second set even came out, they changed it. They errated that card and changed the text. And like I stopped playing the game because I was like, oh, well, this TCG just came out. And if they're creating a card in the first set that they're like, we have nothing coming out to stop how powerful this is, it's like poor planning, right? So this isn't to say, to clarify,
that game is called Altered. So
right,
you know,
they had to live up to this. Well, and to clarify, this isn't to say that like, oh, Ravensburger made a horrible decision. We're not bringing up Bucky, to like hype on that again, more so to say like it's definitely part of the conversation when we talk about erratas because Ravensburger has already done one, so it's not out of the question, right? We know that it is possible, and I think at least when I saw the responses to this tweet and also just generally scrolling around on Twitter and seeing what people had to say, a lot of people are really passionate about this in either direction. Some people are like, no, stop calling for an errata. We're 1 week into the set. This is stupid. The card's fine. You just don't know how to play against it. We're only 1 week into the format, yada, yada, yada. All these arguments that we'll get into. But the people who do think that there should be an errata, or at least will or do expect one, even if they don't think there should be one, also do have legs to stand on because we did errata Bucky, and so like it's not that it's coming completely out of left field for these people. Before we talk a little bit more, I want to read, I have it pulled up here, right? So this was the errata that they did, and it was back in August, and I just want to read what they said so we can talk about, before we decide or like talk about whether or not there will be one, what Ravensburger actually thinks constitutes an errata from when they made one. So they said, errata is not something we take lightly or want to do too often, so we want to give some context for our plans. Errata and bans going forward will be planned to be effective at the hobby launch of the next set unless a change is deemed immediately necessary. So that means anytime they make an errata, unless it's immediately necessary, they're never going to take effect until the next set. That's my understanding of that. And they say that the important part is they want to preserve a fun environment for the game and address cards that cause negative experience for players at all levels. So that means competitive play, and just like for fun, casual is also part of when they're making these decisions. Okay. And then the only other thing I wanted to read from this is when they gave context. And so they gave context for Bucky specifically, but we can talk about what this means and why they made this decision, right? So it says context, Ursula's return gave Bucky players the opportunity to discard multiple cards from opponents' hands as early as turn 2 while building up a board that was very difficult to interact with, creating a stressful environment that just wasn't fun. And they also say that the ward made Bucky untouchable, and they say it took away players' agency to deal with a powerful and cheap threat. For these reasons, we're increasing okay, right? So they're making those changes. So I think the key here, when we talk about whether or not they're going to errata, or then, if they should, is they said that they want to preserve a fun environment for the game and not, and deal with cards that have negative experiences. And then they also said that Bucky made the environment stressful and wasn't fun, right? So it is important for Ravensburger for this game to be fun, and they don't necessarily only care about the competitive players. They're also looking at casuals. So I think with that in mind, some people aren't having fun, right? With the sapphire mirrors and all of this stuff. But is that the same kind of not having fun as we saw with Bucky? What do you think about the difference there?
No, it's definitely not the same thing. I think one of the big reasons people aren't having fun with this one, especially because the set is so new, is that people are taking a significant amount of time doing game actions or trying to figure out which order to do game actions in. Like if someone had 1,000 reps on the deck and they could play very quickly, they wouldn't have like these 5-minute combo turns, right? Whereas with Bucky, your opponent just made it so you couldn't even play the game whatsoever. Like at least with this deck, you can still play 7 or 8 turns, presumably, and be able to play cards and have options, theoretical options in your hand, right? But then like when you watch this on stream, like at the encounter, you could see like some of the opponents against this deck just sitting there on their opponent's turns like this, just like, yep, okay, yep, can you count to 20 items? Okay. Like
Right.
like, so it's a completely different kind of experience, and it's especially going to affect the local level if someone just picks this deck up who's not like deeply ingrained in watching back like SSG coverage or the encounter coverage, stuff like that, or reading Metafy guides on decks, stuff like that. Like they could really just like sit there and take all 50 minutes to themselves essentially, and that's going to be a nightmare. Like I think a lot of people with the Bucky deck and with like Diablo even, like they have to realize that the competitive scene of Disney Lorcana, right? That's like the best swimmers in Alaska. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like it's such a small part of the world. Like Ravensburger, every trading card company makes most of their money off of the social player. And the social player has to be in their mind, right? And it's hard to say like, well, we have a ban list or an errata list for DLCs versus one for local game stores, stuff like this. One thing that I do think is interesting this far in is I think it would be possible to have a ban list for set 7 and ban a previous card or errata a previous card.
Only for this set.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Ravensburger never said it, but I think one of the big issues that they had was Rise of the Floodborn is releasing now in other countries. And to have players opening cards that don't say what they do, I think is a PR nightmare. Again, this is full speculation. I'm not the only person to have said this. In fact, I'm not the first person to have said this. I rarely have my own thoughts. But we're at a point where like set 7 isn't coming out until who knows when. So if there was a card that was banned that was a problem, if you said, you know, to Japan, this X card, let's just say Bucky is going to be banned when set 7 comes out for you. So they have maybe a year to plan. Okay, well maybe I don't want to invest in green steel because I know that this pivotal thing is going to be banned. If they ban, you know, sapphire cards, same thing. Okay, 8 cost Tamatoa is going to be banned once set 7 comes out. Like, do I want to invest in this deck? I think that that could be pretty healthy, honestly. I know that there have been some times where there was a Yu-Gi-Oh card that absolutely dominated Japan because they get the sets early, and they have said, "Hey, we're banning this card before it even comes out. Don't invest in this deck that you're seeing overseas."
I see. So they kind of get like a heads up. Yeah.
Yeah, because the card would have just been like a 3 of staple in every deck and probably would be $100, and then they don't want to ban it, a week into it when thousands of people spent $300,
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think Ravensburger is good options right now, honestly.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's take a look at some of these cards that these people are chatting about here. And of course, as always, you can leave us a comment if you want to be a part of, the discussion, or like we said, hit us up on Twitter, and we can also read your comments in the next video. But all right, so where do you want to start in terms of some of these problematic cards? Because there was a lot mentioned.
Well, you have the images, so wherever you want.
Let's start with Tamatoa. I think this one is an easy one to kind of like quickly talk about in terms of this was the card that, like, besides Sapphire Coil, everybody was like, whoa, this is going to be a problem. And yes, Scrooge as well. People thought Scrooge was really powerful, but this one in particular, right? And we have the ability text here. So on play, you get those items back. Think like Pawpsicle, right? And then when he quests, you can play Dime for free. It's kind of like the best possible scenarios with these cards. The 4/5 stat line is great, right? Like not easily removable unless they are also playing a Sapphire Mirror, right? With Sapphire Coil, and quests for 2. So like an inkable, right? So like this is a powerhouse of a card. But I don't necessarily think this card is like the sole issue that we're like talking about when we talk about these decks. What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I think the deck, the Sapphire Steel deck itself, is kind of like a sandwich, where it's like you would never just eat lettuce, right? Unless you're a crazy person.
Right.
You probably wouldn't just slice a tomato and start eating it, right? Like some people do, but whatever. You're not gonna just take lunch meat out and roll it up and start eating lunch meat or plain bread, right? But once you put all these things together, it's like, wow, this is incredible. There's an Earl named after this. This is great. One of the only good Earls there are out there, actually. But yeah, so Tamatoa, the big problem with Tamatoa is the word free. And we're going to see this a lot, right?
Yeah.
That's why Bucky was such a problem. Every time you played something, you got an effect for free. Okay. So either getting an effect that is very strong for absolutely free, or being able to play a card for free is usually a problem. So Tamatoa not only can play an item for free. Let me tell you, if this card said when it quests, your next item costs 2 less, it'd still be unbelievable. We'd be like, wow, we could play a Dime 1 turn 7, or when we have 7 ink and activate it.
Yeah.
Like it curves perfectly into Dime, activate Dime.
That's true.
It would still be an amazing card.
You're absolutely right.
The fact that it returns items from your discard pile means that the hate cards that people are like, I'll just throw this in my deck and I'll easily win. Benja, I'll find them, I'll flatten them. People are going as far as to play like
5-drop Beast from set 1.
Well, I was gonna say even like Emerald cards like 1-drop Pete,
right?
Which like does nothing on its own. At least like the Clarabelle has a really good shift, right? And like someone was playing the song "He Has My Heart," just 2-cost song, banish an item. If you banish a Pawpsicle, that's still okay because at least they didn't, at least they didn't get to eat it with a Hiram, right? If you banish a Fortisphere, you might actually be doing them a favor. When I was playing with this deck, a problem I was having was like getting the Fortisphere into the discard pile.
Yeah.
On like, I really needed that 1 ink almost every turn, and never could just randomly, I'll give something bodyguard. Like if my opponent were to banish Fortisphere, I'll be like, thanks, I appreciate you. I want to get these back. Hiram even, or not Hiram, Tamatoa even makes it so that something like Lucifer is not that great of a card. If your opponent Lucifers you, you discard 2 items, and then you just return them to your hand. Like, oh yeah, nice 2/2 for 5 over there, uninkable scrub. Yeah. So like it returning items for free with no downside. Like what happened to the set where everything had kicker? Like Mother Gothel, pay 2, you could pay an extra 3 to return something.
Right.
Like this, if this Tamatoa like cost 6, and then you paid 1 to return an item when you played it, or if whatever. There's so many things it could have been. Obviously, this is a circular argument, but this is not the card that I would ban or errata if given the choice.
Okay, so has a lot of issues. Specifically, you think we need to look out for moving forward, making things free, because you're making strong arguments, right? This card is overtuned, some might say, but not the card. Okay.
So also, let me explain something to people who might be their first card game. There's usually a couple of ways of keeping cards in line. One of them is to just power creep the old cards, which is essentially, well, you're never going to play this old card because we have a strictly better version, which just makes the games faster, more powerful, constantly having to spend more money to upgrade your decks, right? Another way of doing this is obviously rotating cards at some point, which we have no announcements, we have no reasons to believe one way or the other. And then the last thing that you can do is you can give power to certain colors, and you keep doing that periodically. So you could still print really good, let's say, emerald cards, right? You could print like a banger emerald card, like Clarabelle, like just an absolutely amazing emerald card. But then you print like much better sapphire cards in one set, right? And you will keep doing that in a circle. So the cards are getting progressively better, but not all 6 inks are getting better at the same
rate.
Power creeping out your entire deck.
I see. So it's kind of like, just like we had, Green Steel, or Emerald Steel rather, had like its time to shine because it had gotten those really powerful cards like Diablo. Now, like you're saying, it's kind of like, well, now Sapphire has its time to shine, and it's kind of gonna rotate that way, as opposed to like, interesting.
And even last set with Genie.
Yeah, that's true. Amethyst decks did have their time to shine.
So like,
good theory.
For all we know, I don't know, Sapphire Emerald or Sapphire Amber is just going to be like the S tier deck in a year. Know what I mean? Yeah. But anyway.
Good thoughts. Okay, so moving on from Tamatoa, let's talk about another popular card. Let's talk about Hiram, because pretty similar in a sense, like it like synergizes well, and like you're drawing cards and it has to deal with the items, so it slots itself naturally into this like package. Has been around since set 2 though, right? So people kind of have been calling for this card to be banned or errated for a while, and a lot of people think, forget Tamatoa, forget Belle. At its core, having so many items that are so cheap and then being able to draw 2 every single time is the problem with, like, 6 statted health, right? Like, so what do you think about Hiram?
So Hiram, way overpowered.
Okay.
For its loss, right? It's also one of the very unique cards that does something when you play it and does it again when you quest. Almost every other card is either it comes into play and does it, and then it's just a useless character that quests, or you have to wait to ready with it and it be dry to quest to use its ability.
Right.
It is so unbelievably weird. And we say it, I don't know how many times we say it when we're like doing commentary, like Dan and I, of like, wow, Gontu just says when you play it, characters can't sing next turn. Or like the big Ursula, when it quests, exert something. Like, it's just such a rare thing for it to have such a insanely powerful ability that happens both when you play it, so if your opponent banishes it, you don't even care. And if they don't banish it, they're probably buried. They're like absolutely buried.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I think Hiram has always been a problem, but it was probably the only card that was keeping most Sapphire decks relevant.
Absolutely.
And I still don't think Hiram is the actual base problem.
Okay, so a problem, very strong, perhaps overtuned again, but not at the core here. So next one, I think a lot of people are kind of saying is the secret culprit, right? The actual problem that nobody's seeing. They're seeing the flashy legendary of Tamatoa. They're seeing the rare in Hiram. Most people are overlooking, some people would say, this common Belle. So you can play Belle for free on turn 1. She is a better 1-drop Cinderella that sings, right, in Amber. So what do you think?
Well, we're going back to free.
Right.
And I could have said this for Hiram as well. What if Hiram just said, when it quested, pay 3, banish an item, draw 2? You'd still play Hiram.
Right.
Like, why is everything free?
Free.
Right? You got the draw 2 when you paid the 4.
Right.
And you got a 1/6, right? We didn't need anything else to be free on that card. But yeah, Belle is basically just free. And honestly, the only reason that she is technically like free is because we have cards that are items that say draw a card.
Right.
Like if you had to play unconventional tool, or if you had to play any Shield of Arendelle, any random terrible card that you couldn't just cycle it when you don't draw the Belle, and you like draw it late game and you're just like, oh, I'm cooked. The Belle wouldn't be a problem. You would never want to go like turn 1 useless item Belle just to have like Strength or Raging Fire. You're down to like 4 cards in your hand at this point.
Right.
So it's like if your opponent just gets through that, then it's fine. They've turned the corner already, you know? But the reason Belle is so oppressive is actually because it shores up what should keep these decks in check, and that is decks that go very quick. Like Nunez had a game where he went from 2 lore to 20 lore when he had like 17 ink in play, right? And it's because cards like Belle or Scrooge, spoiler, that's probably on the list. It's because these free cards, while he's developing all of his other stuff, are able to combat the board.
Right.
Like that is the problem. And people that are complaining about her don't even realize you're not even supposed to play her on turn 1 a lot of the time. Like you think it's just brainless that you should, right? And Nunez in his top 4 match against Braden, his hand was so abysmally bad. He played a Belle on turn 1 just hoping Braden would match it, because then that's 1 less item for Hiram to eat. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes it's just a terrible idea if you only have 1 Pawpsicle or 1 Fortisphere in your hand, to eat it with the Belle just to gain a couple lore. If your opponent's not pressuring you, you're just gaining a couple of lore with it, and then you draw Hiram, and you're like, oh, I'm an idiot. Belle also enables Rapunzel very well.
Yep.
So there's only specific cards that you want to play Belle against. But then the cards that you do want to play Belle against, it is like the most oppressive thing you could ever look on the other side against.
Right.
Like if you just go like turn 1 Maleficent, the biding her time, 1 cost, 1/1 plus for 2. Turn 2 Smee. If your opponent played a Belle, you're just like, whatever, man. I'm done.
Right.
But still, even though I think Belle is a massive problem, at least if you would have to 2-for-1 yourself by getting rid of the item and the item did nothing else, it would be fine.
Yeah.
So I'm not banning Belle.
Okay, so Belle's not getting the boot either. So Tamatoa's not getting the boot. Hiram's not getting the boot. Belle's not getting the boot. I'm running out of cards to talk about here, but I got one more for you. Okay, and that is Fortisphere. All right, so we have this is Pawpsicle and Fortisphere, but specifically when we talk about Sapphire Steel items, right? This is the big thing that's come out. We saw, DLC winner Zan Syed do top 8 down at SSG with it, right? So what Zan does, many will follow. And so Fortisphere is essentially the 8th Pawpsicle, right? So you have 4 Pawpsicles, and then you play Fortisphere, and that's when you play this item, you may draw a card, and then it does something else. So Less about like should we literally ban this card or Pawpsicle, but more about what some people say is the problem with these decks is just like you're saying. It's not Tamatoa on its own. It's not Belle on its own. It's not Hiram on its own. The problem is that the items that these decks have available to them like replace themselves and are cheap and are inkable and are just so efficient, right? And they keep cycling. So when you play, that 1-drop Fortisphere on turn 1, you banish it with the Belle, but you did get to replace that card. And a lot of people are saying these are the true culprits of why the deck is so strong, or why they shouldn't have printed cards that they did in Belle and Tamatoa. So where are you on Fortisphere and Pawpsicle in these decks?
Listen, I can't believe I'm going back to this stupid sandwich reference. For the viewers at home, I did not run by her because I did not think of this until we had already started talking.
This is why
You know
I keep
how
them
when
around.
you know how when you order a sandwich at a restaurant, they're like, oil, vinegar, mayo.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that thing that if you forgot it, you're like, what's wrong with this? But it just makes it.
Right.
Like, it's still a functioning sandwich. Yeah, I'm fat. I'm gonna eat it.
Yeah.
But there's something missing.
Something's
This is
missing.
what's missing. It's the seasoning, right? You can have a steak without salt, but
Mm,
is it really a steak?
right.
Yeah. So these cards are not even close the problem, okay?
Okay.
And have always been the problem.
Okay.
I mean, if you have an active Hiram, that means a Hiram, it's your turn, it's dry. Any one of these is Ancestral Recall, okay? Ancestral Recall is a multi-$1,000 magic card
Wow.
that is restricted and what's in something called the Power 9.
Oh,
The
wow.
9 most powerful cards in all of Magic. You know what it says? 1 blue, draw 3 cards.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you thought Jar of Greed was like
Pot of
that
Greed?
should never ever. Yeah, sorry. Jar of Greed. Slightly worse. I played Yu-Gi-Oh for a little bit, Chain Burn.
Oh.
So if you thought Pot of Greed was broken, drawing 3 cards. Like,
Right.
come on. For almost no downside. And 0 deck building downside. It's like, all right, I've got 20 ink in play, I've got no cards in hand. I'm still alive. Draw another. This is if it was like, all right, Scepter of whatever, I can't even remember the name because this card would never be played. Field of Arendelle. Just like useless 1-cost items that don't replace themselves. And not only that, they're inkable.
Right.
And not only that, like we have 2-cost items that draw cards, right? In Emerald.
Yeah.
We're not seeing some random Emerald Sapphire Bell deck yet.
Right.
But
don't give
plus,
them more ideas.
Look at Oswald, right? We didn't touch on Oswald.
Oswald,
again, as the word free, okay? Like, if you flip a Pawpsicle or a Fortisphere, I'm golden. It could be anything. It could be a boat. Like, it's just insane. And they're the most unassuming cards. Right? And not only that, Fortisphere, like I've said, Fortisphere, it costs 1 ink to give something bodyguard. It costs nothing to heal 2.
No. And
so,
you don't even have to be able to heal 2 to banish it.
Right. So with the new Tamatoa, if you have 2 Pawpsicles in play instead of a Fortisphere and a Pawpsicle, you don't even need 1 ink laying around at any time. You can just banish them, return them to your hand. Yeah. So, I'm not saying that these cards need to be errated or banned.
Okay.
What I am saying is, if I were Ravensburger and I decided we're at a point where that has to happen, my vote is Pawpsicle.
Wow. I don't even have that pulled up. How dare you?
There's a couple.
Pulling it up.
Yeah, it's funny. You told me to make a list, and I didn't even say Pawpsicle. I said I put Fortisphere on. Because, again, Fortisphere locks you into having to play. Fortisphere basically makes Belle a multicolor card. Like, it's a Sapphire card. You could technically play it in Sapphire anything. But the fact that you have 8 different 1-cost inkable draw a card items means Belle is essentially a blue steel card.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's kind of restricting itself. The fact that you could put Belle into anything, like I could see a world where we're playing Emerald Sapphire, which has not been a tier 1 deck, with Oswald's and these terrible uninkable items that just draw cards and Bells, just because the way that deck always lost was getting run over in the early game. If you could just play a 0 downside 3/3, that changes everything. But yeah, so Pawpsicle, it works the best with Tamatoa, right? And if they were to ban it during set 7 meta, they could still let the rest of the world who is catching up to us play with it up until set 7. And I think one of the reasons that Bucky took the fall over Diablo, honestly, was that it was a common from an old set, and people were still specifically buying the new set to get this awesome new legendary. The only problem with this is, and this has happened in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this happened in other games, it's pretty embarrassing to ban a card. It shouldn't be. It should not be embarrassing, in my opinion, but it is. I've said it many times. You've got like 10 playtesters that work at Ravensburger versus 10,000, 100,000 players that are out here trying to break the game. Like, it's our goal to find their mistakes.
Right.
Like, imagine that was your job and someone just checked everything you did at all times just to see you mess up. Like, it's scary, you know?
Right.
I would rather play a game where they have cards that are a little too good and pushing the envelope than a game where we're playing with a bunch of vanilla statted characters that do nothing.
Right.
So, like, yeah. So I would do the Pawpsicle, but again, if it ended up being in a position of like, now we still have to get rid of something else, that just looks even worse from a PR perspective.
Well, do you mean to say that if they change Pawpsicle and have to change something else, that's the issue?
Yeah, like if they change Pawpsicle and then a month later they go, hey, remember when we said we were fixing things and we didn't? No, this time we're fixing things. And then you get to a point, it's like, all right, how many cards from my deck am I going to have to replace? Like, this is getting out of hand, you know?
Right.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm still perfectly fine with them banning and errating nothing at all.
Nothing at all. All right, so if it was going to happen, you would pick Pawpsicle. I have Pawpsicle on the screen now. I put a big, like, canceled sign over it just so you know what's happening. So this is Dick Burns' pick for if we were going to change something, this is what he would change. I could see the argument. I see what you're saying. I think it's a perfect storm is the issue, is where, like, when you have all of these things working together and nothing else that has that many things working together and is that strong. So I do think I tend to lean a little more nothing needs to happen yet. I do think it's too early. Some people were joking around and they were like, oh, you really thought, you know, Zan was going to play blue steel items. He was just trying to get everybody else on it. He's already cooked up the answer to beat the deck. I thought that was like a pretty funny.
That's hilarious. And it has to be a joke because, like, imagine taking everyone's money for Metafy and then being like, just kidding, I fed you bad information on purpose. There are people that do that.
Right.
I don't think Zan is going to be one of them.
No, I agree. I don't think they meant it in a bad way, but I just thought it was, they were like, I believe in Zan. He'll you know, make something anti-meta, but I just thought it was such a funny thing to say. So you know, there are people that are like, no, just give it some more time and you know, we'll figure this out. And I do think in terms of looking back to, you know, what we discussed where Ravensburger said the ultimate thing is like people need to be having fun. It's like you said, it's a different kind of not fun that we're having right now where, like, in non-competitive spaces where, people are picking up these decks for the first time. I picked up Ruby Sapphire for the first time. I am thinking more, and everybody is, right? There's a lot to think about. There is a lot of decision making happening. And so those games are naturally taking longer until people learn, their perfect curves or, their best options. So it is not fun, potentially, but not in the same way where, Bucky by turn 2, I'm just top decking until they can hit 20 lore, So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. The big problem, honestly, is when you have a deck that has no really bad matchup. Like, you can have a deck that beats 9 out of 10 decks as long as the 10th deck crushes the S tier deck, right?
Yeah.
And then what will end up happening, which we've talked about in other videos, is there will be a rock, paper, scissors, right? And just for an example, for people that have been playing, is like Ruby Amethyst during like set 2 and 3 made people want to quit playing the game, right? It was just everywhere.
Yeah.
But it also got like destroyed by flutes.
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
To the point where, like, I've said it before. When I met James, he went to time and drew with a Ruby Amethyst deck, and I said, "Dude, you could be like falling asleep and beat that deck." And I explained to him how, and he just 2-0'd it in 5 minutes the next round.
Right.
But then Amber Steel had a really bad time against Fishbone Quill decks.
Right.
So it had a nice little circle.
Right.
So as long as people can find something that beats Sapphire Steel consistently, then it is perfectly fine if there's only 3 decks. We were spoiled with a couple of metas right now.
Right.
One of them being Azerite C meta, which we're just getting out of. So people are going to feel even more jaded coming from an amazing metagame into one that, even if it is 3 decks, it's going to look really bad to them.
Yep.
But
yeah,
so far I don't see it though. So far I don't see a deck where if I'm playing Sapphire Steel, I'm like, God, I'm cooked. Especially if my opponent is not as experienced as me.
That's true. Yeah, I was gonna say, because even like some decks where you see non-Sapphire Steel item decks that were like in the top cuts, I believe, actually I was just watching the meta report on TFM, and we had a top 2 mirror match of Sapphire Steel, but it was more like a Kiwi version and an aggro version rather than the item. So that's still in Sapphire Steel, right? So yes, we are getting away from the items, but right now, those colors are just kind of what's been popping off. So it remains to be seen, I think, where everything is going to land. I think the biggest thing is, let's not pull the trigger on, pitchforks and banging down Ravensburger's door, being like, please ban these cards, and more so just like, first, let's try our best to get innovative, see what we can come up with. And if that doesn't happen, we'll have to see where we end up falling as a community. But
I got one more thing.
Yep.
So, Japan's been on the mind. I'm going there. So I've been looking at Japanese tournaments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember here in America, Ruby Amethyst was just like, during set 1, Ruby Amethyst was just the nightmare. Like, it usually went to decking, right?
Yes.
Me and Dan were looking at a decently large tournament that happened in Japan where Emerald Amethyst was 44% of the metagame. Like,
that's what?
Yeah.
Well, they do it over there.
So, like, the thing is, Zan has a reason to innovate. Right? He has a brand. He has a love for the game that a lot of people don't have. And just like during set 1 here, Dan would say it in a lot of the meta reports, there's no official tournaments. There's no real reason to just like destroy your brain trying to figure out the format. There's just like a 10K, honestly, not a good enough reason for most people.
Yeah.
Well, holding a golden Mickey, getting on the world's stage, that is a good enough reason for most people.
For sure.
So there could be another deck out there. There could be something that destroys it, that unless there is official organized play from Ravensburger, it may never see the light of day, honestly.
Yeah.
So just some food for thought.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't even get to Sapphire Coil, and honestly, I think we leave it for another day because it's not it's not the problem in in Sapphire Steel items. I think this was a really great discussion, though. I really wanted to just like learn from you as somebody who has been through erratas and ban lists from multiple games, and now coming into this, like Lorcana being the fresh face thing that it is, you know. I do think people can get a little trigger happy with erratas. We've seen like hashtag ban the bird. We've seen ban Hiram right before even like this, you know, this set came out. You know, ban Bucky obviously was successful. So it's one of those things where every single set release people are upset, but it kind of dies down. And you know, just like, you know, we didn't really touch on Sapphire Coil, but I think it's fair to say that like that was a little overhyped in the sense that it's not the single problem card, at least that's come up so far. You've got stuff to say about Coil.
It was a good scapegoat.
It was.
And you could see some of the better players on Twitter kind of like getting annoyed and being like, y'all are worried about the wrong card.
The wrong deck, yeah.
Whereas the players that were playing week 1 were like, shut up. Let
them be worried. Yeah.
But I really do think that if Sapphire Steel was not the S tier deck, that Sapphire Coil is still a massive problem. Like, I'm not saying like it was all propaganda.
Yeah.
I still think that it would be a huge problem. And games that I saw on stream prove that to me. But it would be a whole different world with a whole different set of problems. And that would be a deck that Abenja could deal with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think this was a really healthy discussion. I want to encourage everybody to keep it healthy in the comments. I know.
Start arguing. Start fighting. It's good for the algorithm. Tell me how stupid I am.
You know, I just want to say, you know, like, obviously there's strong opinions about this. And I think some people are like, this is stupid. Everybody who calls for erratas every single set is stupid. We want to hear it. Okay, so put it in the comments. But for those of you that are like, look, I don't think it's stupid. I actually think, you know, for the health of this game, some things need to change. We also want to hear it. It remains to be seen. Like I said, what the meta is going to shake out to be. I think there are some cards and just like combos right now going on that we got to have our eyebrows lifted at. And it's not really worth it right now with no, you know, competitive play future insight to kind of like try and figure it out, unless you just like are in it for the love of the game. And we're in it for the love of the game, but like I got a day job, you know, I can't sit there trying to break the meta all the time. So I don't know, let us know what you think. Thank you, Dick, for sharing that with us. I feel like I learned a lot. Hopefully everybody at home did as well. If you enjoyed, please leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us some comments, but be nice about it. And we will see you in the next one. Peace.